welcome to Served Up. This podcast is where hospitality meets leadership and where we take an honest look at the business of beverage. I'm Bridget Albert. I've spent my career building cocktail programs, mentoring rising talent, judging competitions, and advocating for women in our industry. I'm joined by my co-host, Eric Heemer, one of only 5 people in the world to hold both the Master Sommelier and Master of Wine titles. His depth of knowledge and global perspective brings tremendous insight to every conversation. This is Served Up.
Welcome to Served Up. Bridget and I had a fascinating conversation today with Antonio Capaldo, the owner of the iconic Feudi di San Gregorio winery located high in the European hills of Campania along the Mediterranean coast of Italy. Founded in 1986, Feudi di San Gregorio is the largest family-owned winery in southern Italy. The estate farms 740 acres of vineyards. Along with a few other local wineries, the Capaldo family were responsible for the renaissance of local varieties used to make wine since Roman times that were on the brink of extinction in the 1970s. Today, vine varieties such as Aglianico, Greco, Fiano, and Falanghina are again thriving and producing delicious, distinctive wines in the volcanic soils of the region. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the interview.
Buongiorno,
Antonio. Welcome to Served Up.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks a lot.
Well, we're really happy to have you. I'm excited for our audience to learn all about you and Feudi and your great, great wine. So just to get started, we'd love to learn a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, maybe your future dreams and aspirations, anything you want to tell us about your earlier years. We'd appreciate it.
Okay, I actually come from the dark side, you may say, because I studied economics. I worked in investment banking before, then I worked in management consulting. So until I was 32, I grew up with the winery being almost my age and part of my family since I was born, but I was not involved in that. I was more involved into number crunching and giving bad advice to other corporates. Then in 2009, I finished my period in a consulting firm where I was elected a partner and I was 32. And I was somehow thinking that I wanted to try to do something on my own or at least have a managerial role rather than being a consultant on my life. And it happened, and this was also a time where no one from the family in Feudi di San Gregorio was actually managing this because my uncle left the winery in 2006 and there was no one from the family. So actually, this was like the perfect opportunity to go back to the family, go back to my native land, go back also to the real business and try to do, to give for free bad advice to myself rather than being paid for giving bad advice to other people. This proved to be tough because honestly, I moved back. I was relatively young to handle this strong change. So it was not easy for me at the beginning because I was used more to work with large corporates. And all of a sudden, although my heart was strictly connected to the winery, to Irpinia, to this region, it was not easy for me to understand all the dynamics. Now, I make an example, which I think is pretty clear, which is the relationship with time. I came from a background. I came because now I've forgotten. I'm talking about 17 years ago, but I came from a background that was where time was considered a cost, and I was getting a background into a place where actually time could be a value, and it is a value for wine, for vines, for wine aging, for also the pleasure of wine. But there is one thing that is common though, even if time can be a value, you need to be able to bear the cost that is attached to time anyway. But it was difficult for me at the beginning to understand that you needed time in order to get certain things done in wine, and that actually only through time you could need certain things done in wine. So this was for me quite a significant change. Then I joined in 2009 the family winery. I was I'm actually the only member of the family running this. And since 2009, I'm the chairman of the winery. Of course, my connection with wine was significant from the start. But luckily for the wines themselves, I'm not the winemaker, but actually I have a different type of responsibility, and I have a fantastic team here in charge of winemaking. And my background remains mostly economic.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. And I think you were meant to be returning to the winery. I think it was always destined to be. And I know it's worked out very well for you. And I'm sure you're much more relaxed these days with that slower pace that you take in the Arpenian Hills and just that slowing down of time, watching the vines grow and seeing, supervising, all the things that happen at Feudi. So I'm glad you're there, and you seem very, very happy, and I hope
Thanks.
you are.
No. Time indeed is a value that even individually you should treasure in wine. Although I have to say that moving from a consulting role to an entrepreneurial role, then it's not that easy in terms of relationship with risk, which is another thing that is actually connected with time. So it is true that I have a much more relaxed but also meaningful life, in the sense that I really try to do things that can have an impact. Also, when we talk about regeneration, sustainability, long term vision, all these things that we decide to pursue have an impact and are meaningful. At the same time, it's not always easy to understand and actually to feel and bear the risk that is attached to certain number of decisions. While before, in my previous job, in the evening, you kind of wash it everything out, and then you
Hmm.
were ready to start the next day. Even if it was very, very intense, you didn't have such a lot of skin in the game, which is now the case.
Yes, yes. Let's step back just a moment. And I know that Feudi was founded in 1986 by your
Correct.
family, but please tell us a little bit about the circumstances. What drew your family into the wine business?
Actually, we don't come from the wine business. That's the first thing. I mean, my grandfather used to make a very bad wine, by the way. Uh, yeah, because everybody was making wine in Irpinia in their cellar, but it was really, really, really not particularly exciting story. Actually, the story became our story after the earthquake on 1980, which was one of the most terrible earthquake of Europe. Devastated the region in 1980. And my father had a couple of my father, big family, 11 brothers and sisters, so it's like Sopranos family, big family with a few of his actually brothers and sisters. There were four at the beginning. They decided to invest in back in their homeland. They all worked outside Irpinia. They moved outside to study or to work, and they decided to reinvest in their homeland to create employment and create an opportunity. And so wine seemed an obvious choice because in parallel, after the earthquake, there was a lot of companies coming from the north of Italy investing to create employment, but this was just because they could get subsidies from the region or from the government.
Mm.
And it is true that 20 years later, nothing was there anymore. Then the decision that my family took was to invest on something that was part of our roots, that has a significant labor intensity because it's agriculture and viticulture, that could create a long-term opportunity and also a kind of pride in being part of a really local story, and also significant, I would say, external effects for the rest of the community, wine tourism, restaurants, hotels, etc. We haven't been successful in everything, but that was the idea. No? So then they started in 1986 in an area, Irpinia, that has an incredible history in viticulture, fantastic indigenous varietals, but we didn't have an enormous history in winemaking. There were only a few producers transforming the grapes. So when Feudi started in 91 making a Novello, which was the fashionable at the time, we were the sixth bottler in the area. Now there are over 150. So I would say that the bet that my parents, my parents and my family did was actually successful because they created a winery that is the largest winery in southern Italy, which is Feudi. But they also created a lot of buzz and dynamism in the region towards wine. There's plenty of things still to do, a lot. But I would say this is very, very short, in a very short way, the reason why everything started. And also, I think the reason why it was successful is because we always reinvested everything in the business, because we always had an idea that this was meant to be something more meaningful than just profit. Now, this is why we never distributed dividends. And we are at the forefront also in terms of relationship with the community. We are a benefit corporation. And that's why we really think that this is quite a crucial part of our business model.
That's amazing. Can you tell our listeners, Antonio, what is the origin of the name Feudi di San Gregorio?
We have two great legacies here. One is we need to pay a tribute to the Romans and the Greek and the Etruscan, because they brought us these fantastic indigenous varietals, Fiano, Greco, Aglianico, Falanghina. They all have 2,000 years of history. And that's our first legacy. But the second one, which is pretty important for all viticulture in Europe, is actually the church, the monasteries, and the abbeys. In the Middle Age, they protected the production of grapes, mostly because it was part of the Holy Mass, which was part of the Christian religion and ritualism, also was part of the diet of the monks at the time. And while protecting the viticulture, they also protected these indigenous varietals, because if we didn't have them, we could not have Piano, Greco, or Falanghina today. So the origin of the name is actually feudi is the Italian word for feudal estates. So estates in the feudal time, so in the Middle Age, of Gregory the Great. San Gregorio was a pope in the 6th century. And supposedly, the region, the area around the winery where the winery is located today was part of the personal wealth of the pope already in the 6th century. And he was already making wine at the time, which is true for many areas of Italy and Europe. But we decided that we really wanted to remember and remind everyone that this is a significant part of our legacy in Italy and in Europe in general. So Feudi di San Gregorio comes from that point. So the fact that even at the time of Gregory the Great, and probably already at the time of Gregory the Great, in this area they were making wine, and actually the road where the winery is located is called Contrada San Gregorio because of that.
That's amazing. So interesting. So much history there.
Yeah, this is Italy is all about this. Europe and France as well, but Italy, we have these incredible stories behind our indigenous varietals, and we have an incredible stratification of stories in the world of wine, because Italy was definitely the area where wine was there since the Romans, but was also preserved through the Middle Age. So we have a quite uninterrupted relationship with wine, and it was not created by commercial opportunity. It was really deeply rooted in our civilization and in our culture.
I love that. And for our listeners that maybe have never had the opportunity to visit Italy, and they should, right? Can you paint us a picture of the terroir of your beautiful region, the climate, the geography, the soil, and the grape varieties that you cultivate?
Yeah, in terms of diversity within the region, is a little bit like a continent, because when you think about Campania, you immediately think, okay, Naples, and then you think about the Amalfi Coast, and then you think about Capri, and then you think about Ischia, and then it's difficult to think of that and then move inland 40 kilometers from there, where we are, and find a completely different landscape, because this area is a kind of a continental island within the Mediterranean Sea. It's all enclosed by mountains. We have approximately 180 days of rain. So I know that it doesn't make anybody dream of visiting, but it's actually fantastic for winemaking, for the freshness of the wines. And throughout the centuries, because of different eruption of volcanoes and different level of soil stratification and structure, we have fantastic mineral soils. And all our vines grow from 500 meters to 800, 900 meters. Last year, we had 1,200 millimeters of rain, which is what you find in London, which is what you find in Champagne. So it's a very intriguing terroir, particularly vocated, I think, for white wines in a distinctive way, because it brings together freshness and minerality, sapidity. So structure intensity. This is something that is pretty difficult to find all coupled together in a great white wine. Of course, Taurasi is also a fantastic red wine, but this is all related to very special terroir. And actually, from Naples, you really, when you come and see as you move in the mountains, it's super beautiful. There is over 1,000 castles from the Middle Age. The winery is very beautiful to visit. You have a fantastic, trattorias where you can have local dishes, but it's very different from what you could experience on the coast. So actually, you need to come to Campania. You need to stay a little bit longer. Of course, you need to spend a bit of time by the coast, have your mozzarella in Positano, in front of Capri, wherever you want to go, but then move a little bit inland and find a completely different context that is our area, which is great for winemaking.
Wonderful. And something that's really on the hearts and minds of so many folks is sustainability, right? And something that you hold is a very prestigious B Corp certification. And that really is the most important sustainability certification in the world. Can you tell us, about that and what does that mean for your wines?
Yeah, I already mentioned this a couple of times before, no? Because really something I care about is this is everybody speaks about sustainability today, and we're very lucky to be in a sector, viticulture and agriculture, where sustainability is not like a marketing tool or a fashionable element of your business. It has to be part of your business model because when you plant a vine, and that's we go back to the idea of time. When you plant a vine before 7, 10 years, you don't have a good. I mean, sometimes you have it in 5, you have it in 7, but you need time to have a good harvest. And then sometimes, for instance, in a Taurasi, you need another 5 or 6 years in the cellar before releasing the wine. So, thinking long term, thinking when you plant a vine, how this area in particular is going to change in the next 10, 20, 30 years, because before you recover the investment in a vineyard, you need 25, 30 years sometimes, depending on how much is productive, how much is costly to do it. So actually, sustainability it needs to be a crucial and central part of every approach in agriculture and viticulture. Also, when it comes to people, because you plant a vine, you need to know that people are going to be happy to work on them, and they're going to continue to work on them, and you want to train them, and you want to make them feel that being a farmer is actually cool, sometimes cooler than going to the city to do a job that maybe they don't like and is not related to their family roots. So actually, there is a lot to do around this. So that's why we became a benefit corporation, and then we became a B Corp. A B Corp is an U.S. originated in U.S. certification, where you decide you want to be part of a group of companies. Actually, there are not many wineries. Every company across sector, many companies across different sectors, where you decide that you want to be a positive force for the community around you, community and territory around you. And we have a quite comprehensive program in different directions. So from people to, of course, sustainable farming to renewable energies that we publish every year in our website, in our annual report. And we tried, it's a good thing about B Corp is that actually whatever you did past year, it needs to be a basis for next year. So it's a continuous movement where you get continuous input from the best B Corp in the world to do better. And I think that's the reason why we really felt that B Corp was our certification. Now B Corp is also changing. I think that when you decide to be a benefit corporation, which is actually the concept is we are not just for profit. So we have, of course, is the basis for the economic sustainability of the business, but we also want to pursue other things. And actually, is a kind of definition of a company that was actually created in Delaware before, and then Italy was the first sovereign state to introduce it, and now it's a little bit everywhere from France to many other countries in the world. I think that when you decide to be a benefit corporation, and you write in your bylaws that you are a benefit corporation, for me, this is even more meaningful than a certification because at the end, certification changes. For instance, now B Corp is undergoing a major change to adjust to the European Commission that is introducing new regulation about transparency to consumers. So it's never easy we have several certifications. It's never easy to follow how also certifications are evolving, and it's always tricky to align your objectives to a specific certification. So I would say that we have a much broader approach, and that we define the approach ourselves internally, and this is what we are particularly proud, because all our protocols have been really worked by us for a long time in order to be as much as possible adjust to our reality, to the reality of our terroir, to the reality of the people that work in the winery and outside the winery. And that's, I think, is what we believe we mean by sustainability, is not tick the box, but actually create a new ecosystem where the business, the winery, is just a part of a changing ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation of what's going on with that too, because it is constantly evolving and you have to adapt to new changes. And I know it's a lot of work to, maintain certification for sustainability, but it's something that you deeply believe in. And we all thank you for, leading the charge and being a prime example of what sustainability in action is all about, especially in the wine business. It's so many moving parts. So let's dive in a little bit and talk more about wine. We talked about some of the grape varieties, but I'm not sure that everybody in our audience understands the varieties that you're growing in the Arpenian Hills and these beautiful volcanic soils are ancient varieties. These are indigenous grapes that were grown. Who knows when they were first grown? You might know. I certainly don't know, but they're centuries and centuries and centuries old. And some of the names are perhaps less familiar with the consumer today, especially in the United States, than other grape varieties. But these are fantastic wines. And you've already pointed out that the soil and the climate there is particularly well adapted to white wines. When a lot of people think about Italian wine, they think about red wines, but I think white wines are having a great moment right now. And I think consumers are overly familiar with Pinot Grigio, and it's the great time to try Greco di Tufo and Fiano di Avellino. And my favorite white wine that you make is the Greco di Tufo Cutizzi from a single vineyard, the Reserva, and it's just a fantastic wine. Tell us about some of the white wines that you're making, please, Antonio.
Yes, they're not, as you said, I mean, they're not varietals that everybody knows. Of course, it's not Chardonnay, it's not Sauvignon Blanc. The three names are Greco, Fiano, and Falanghina. As you said, they have a big history behind the shoulders, probably 2 millennia. They were already mentioned at the time Vesuvio erupted in Plinius Naturalis Historia, so they were there probably since ever. I think it's actually our luck. We are extremely grateful to have those indigenous varietals here, because, and the fact that they are so connected with the terroir and the soils, make the real concept of terroir alive. Now, we all know that the concept of terroir is a varietal, an ecosystem, so climate, soils, etc., and the man. And the fact that our men here, they always worked with these varietals, and they never planted Fiano where Greco was supposed to be, and vice versa. They don't overlap, even if it's a small region. The varietal are separated is because they had a very clear idea which soils was the best for which varietal. So first of all, we are very lucky to have them, because also they are quite distinctive in the world of wine, because they express at best the freshness and the sapidity and the minerality of the soils. They vehiculate that in a fantastic way, much more than what a Chardonnay or Sauvignon could ever do for us. We tried that because in the 90s, of course, we tried everything in order to experiment and learn. We planted just behind the winery. There is a small plot where we planted several varieties to test, and it is clear that our indigenous varietals vehiculate our terroir in a much more interesting way than what the so-called international varietals do. Now, the difference is, I mean, the three, by the way, they're very different one from the other, because of the aromaticity, but also because of the soils. The first one I mentioned, the Falanghina, which is the most aromatic, is a semi-aromatic varietal. It grows on a volcanic stone, so you have a very nice expression of aromaticity in the nose, but then a good structure also in the palate, and a relatively long and mineral finish. And then there are the two that are more more important also in gastronomic terms, because they are fantastic for pairing with food. They are very good food wines. On one end there is Greco, and on the other end there is Fiano. Now Greco becomes Greco di Tufo, which is the DOCG appellation, is AOC in France. So the highest appellation, because Tufo is the name of a town. If you grow Greco in the area of Tufo, then it can become Greco di Tufo, DOCG, or Greco di Tufo, DOCG Reserva, like Cutizzi. Similarly, Fiano become Fiano di Avellino DOCG or Fiano di Avellino DOCG Reserva if the vines are planted around Avellino. Now, what's the difference between these two wines? I like, of course, you have a lot of, like in every fantastic wine region, and the Irpinia is one of those, there is no one stereotype of Greco and one stereotype of Fiano. So you have a lot of different expression of them. But in general, what is interesting is that Fiano is the more harmonious. There is a lot of harmony in the nose, in the mouth, well balanced. It grows on limestone, very, very polished wine with a very great longevity because it has the same freshness of Greco. But it's a wine that the concept of harmony and balance for me is the most important one. Very elegant. Now, Greco is a super powerful brother. Is restless. So sometimes it's annoying also because it's complicated to handle. It's a very delicate varietal. But at the same time, Greco has a power, a muscle, a structure, an intensity that is quite unusual in white wines. So the difference is that to put your nose in a glass of Fiano, you immediately find the harmony yet fresh, balsamic of what you expect in a white wine. When you smell a Greco, sometimes it's closed, it's dark, it's unsettled. That's the beauty of it. When you drink it, then the thing reverses. Greco is so intense and powerful that somehow covers Fiano and requires the right, the right food to pair with. But it's pretty unique. So I understand why you like Cutizzi, because in particular, Cutizzi is a Greco growing on sulfur mines. There are the largest sulfur mines in southern Italy in that area. And actually, this comes in a wine. This results in a wine that really has a lot of vibration, a lot of energy, of course, minerality, but this doesn't express the power that the wine can have. It has tannins, which is quite unusual in white wines, that really in the aftertaste can create a persistence that is really, really unique. So I'm also a little bit of a partisan of Greco, although historically Fiano was the varietal here because of its harmony. It was considered the prince of wines, while Greco was, the crazy soldier. But sometimes the crazy soldiers beats the prince, which happens in particular in good vintages.
That's a good way to put it. I'll have to think about that, the crazy soldier, next time I drink a glass of the Cutizzi. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the noble red wine variety of your area, which of course is Aglianico. And one of the most striking things that I encountered when I first visited Feudi di San Gregorio was these old Aglianico vines that are trained way up high on these trellising, these pergola systems. Tell us a little bit about this noble grape variety and the noble wine Taurasi.
Yeah, I see some of the old vines behind you, actually. No, actually, Taurasi is made of Aglianico. Taurasi is the name of a town. And actually, Aglianico, to become Taurasi, has to grow around the Taurasi town. Now, so it's an appellation again, it's a DOCG appellation. Aglianico is, in Italy, you have, historically, you had the three varietals that represented the backbone of Italy. It was Nebbiolo for Piedmont, Valtellina, but Piedmont mostly. Then you have Sangiovese, mostly in Tuscany. And then you had Aglianico in Irpinia, in Vultue, in the rest of Campania, a little bit of Puglia. Now, then there are many others, of course, the Primitivo and Negramaro in Puglia, now a lot of about Etna. But Aglianico historically was a significant varietal also because a lot of the grapes were sold to the northern producers because it's rich in everything. It's rich in color, it's rich in alcohol, it's rich in tannins. When this was allowed, there was even a railway bringing the grapes from Irpinia up to Tuscany and Piedmont. So it was very famous from a viticultural standpoint, a little bit less in winemaking because there were only a few that were transforming it. Most of the grapes were sold to cut the wines from the north. But historically, this was a varietal that everybody really enjoyed because it is a varietal incredibly rich. And that's also a little bit the difficulty. Some of your listeners may have tried the terrazis and didn't like it. Didn't like it because it's complicated to harvest an Aglianico at the right time. And in particular, it was complicated more. It was more complicated 20 years back when you really harvested in November with temperature around 0 degrees Celsius, and you really needed to make a decision to harvest maybe one day before what your experience taught you, but the day before was expecting to have a hailstorm, and so you had to pick up. So sometimes in some vintages, Aglianico tended to be rustic, and people, the wisdom is, okay, Aglianico, you need 30 years before drinking it. It's not true, actually. The challenge is to get the tannin right. And I have to tell you that over the past 10 years, because of climate change, which of course I'm not thanking in general, but in that specific area, on the mountains around Torasi, the fact of harvesting now 10, 15th of October is helping a lot with good climate to get the right tannin, the right roundness of tannins. So we're seeing increasingly Torasis and Torasis Reserva that they keep their character, they keep their intensity, but they gain a lot in elegance. That's why I think that today is the right time for your listeners who may have tried Torasi and may have been a little bit, that may have experienced troubles with this intensity, with this big taste of Aglianico, or your listeners who never tried it. I think it's the right time to try them, because Tarasis have never been so good as they are today, because we are in a context and in a situation where the climate is allowing us to take risks than before we couldn't take. And
Yes.
farmers and producers, they are so exciting about what we are doing now in Terrazzi. Then otherwise, Aglianico, of course, 2000 years of history again, comes from the Greek word, probably from the Greek word Ellenike, although some others say that it comes from an Etruscan word. Anyway, big history behind the shoulders as well. And I believe fantastic pages ahead of it.
So Aglianico and Torazzi are entering into the golden age thanks to climate change. Usually we talk about negative aspects of climate change, but this is great for people growing Aglianico and making wonderful wines. Not just Torazzi, of course, but other wines made from Aglianico. And the wines age extremely well. People talk about Barolo and Barbaresco and Brunello de Montalcino aging well, but Taurasi ages just as well. I've had 30, 40-year-old bottles that were beautiful, and the tannins are ripe and smooth, and everything's perfect with a couple decades of bottle age. Of course, you can drink it when it's younger, but if you have the patience to lay it down, it rewards patience.
Yeah, before it was tough to drink it when it was younger, and sometimes the wines got into the market too early. Now it's even more true what you're saying. So the wines, you can drink it early, but then they can stay for a very long time in your cellar, and you're taking no risk when you wait 20, 25, or 30 years for a Taurasi. I think the same longevity is shared by the whites. Probably not 30 years, I don't know, but you have an incredible longevity for the whites. It's a region that has no fear of, comparing with Burgundy or with Mosel in terms of the freshness that the wines can express, also the white wines.
Yeah, some of the greatest white wines produced anywhere in the world. I wanted to talk a little bit about Pompeii and the archaeological park there. I was fortunate to recently visit, and I noticed the vineyards that are planted there. And I know this is something that's a big involvement that you've been working on. Can you tell us a little bit about this project?
Yeah, after all we have been talking about, of course, it's obvious that this opportunity, we have to get it, because the opportunity was an international tender launched in 2020, if I remember correctly, yes, by the Pompeii Archaeological Park, to start from 1 hectare of existing vineyards and expand it to 5 hectares, a little bit more than 5 hectares, and create a fully self-standing and working winery inside the park to transform the wine of these vineyards and then make a wine 100% made inside the archaeological park. This was a project that we were granted the victory in the tender in 2023. It was a long process, and now we got in last year. Eventually, we're working on the vineyards, so it will take a little bit longer then we anticipated to get the wines from Pompeii. But in 2-3 years, probably we're going to have the first release of the wines from the vines that originally were there. But the project for me, what's interesting is not just making wine, and by the way, giving value and exposure to the same varietals that we grow at the winery, because these were the ones being in Pompeii. But I think the real value is about explaining the cultural value of wine, in particular in a moment where wine often is connected with negative aspects, health issues, young people that don't want to drink wine. I think it's important to reinstate how crucial wine has been in the Mediterranean culture, in our civilization, why the men planted the vine everywhere they could, because actually it was helping also to handle the integrity of the soil, why the Romans planted olive oil, olive tree, and vines where they conquered the population. It was a message to the conquered population, because when you harvest a vine, you need more than 1 year. So when you plant a vine, you give a message by saying, we are staying here for a long term. So that's why the vine was somehow expanded from Rome to the rest of Europe. So there are plenty of stories behind, and I think the real value is that we're going to make wine inside Pompeii, showing it to 4.5 million people visiting every year. We're going to bring these bottles everywhere in the world to say loud that wine is part of our culture, is part of our conviviality, because this was Romans used for in the banquets and feasts. And that, of course, consumption in moderation is something that is good for your soul and is good for your friends and is good for your life. And I think that's the most important and, of course, the biggest challenge of this project, because we really wanna be able to talk about it, and we have an incredible audience to do so, thanks to the partnership with the Pompeii Park, because we are not renting it, we are developing it together with one of the most important archaeological park of the world. And that's, I think, is an incredible opportunity for us.
Here. We'll drink to that.
Yeah, it's just absolutely amazing and just a gift for the rest of us, right? Which you're
Hopefully,
doing.
if we make
It
it
will
right,
be. Absolutely. Well, Antonio, I want to just thank you so much for joining Eric and I today on Served Up. And thank you, of course, our audience for listening. And if you're interested in visiting the winery, it's an easy drive from Naples to Amalfi. In addition to tours and tastings and more, they have a wonderful on-site restaurante as well. So please visit their website today to learn more, listeners, at www.viade.it for more information. And with that, Antonio, I just want to wish you some great health and a lot of peace. Cheers to you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being with you. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you, Antonio.
Thanks for listening. Served Up is brought to you by Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits. Produced by Zunu.online. Music by We Killed the Lion can be found on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe to be notified of our future Served Up episodes. Cheers.